Would you join me this morning in the responsive reading printed in your bulletins? There is much we cannot understand.
Much we cannot order or control.
Let us set forth our lives then, not mostly towards outcomes,
but towards ways of being that are worthy of this life.
Let us assure all who gather here this day that no
one need walk to freedom alone.
May we, in this hour and wherever we go, be good company to those we meet
along the sacred way.
Good morning and welcome to Fountain Street Church. I'm Jason Hubbard, one of the ministers here at Fountain Street Church. If you're new with us today, we're so glad that you're with us, and we are so glad to welcome the Flying Dragon Daiko drummers this morning. My job is to introduce to you the sensei and director of this drumming corps, which has presented to me a wonderful opportunity to touch a tradition of which I knew nothing until this wonderful bit of curious and I think you've probably already experienced almost terrifying wonder came to be an opportunity for us to celebrate in this time between the Gregorian New Year, January 1, and the Lunar New Year, which is traditional of East Asian cultures, but no longer of Japan. Japan at one time did celebrate the Lunar Year, but no longer does. And so now we find ourselves in this wonderful renewing period. And this music seems to call deeply to that tradition. So I'd like to welcome this morning for you to meet Esther Vandekar, who has a journey of her own to share with you about how is it that she came to Daiko and a little bit about the tradition so that as we experience it this morning, you might know its richness and depth just a little more. Esther.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay. The tale I told this morning was a myth, and I kind of want to tell you the real truth. I lived in Japan for 7 years, and I discovered Taiko the first year, and it changed my life 180 degrees, and I have never looked back, and it was all for the good. But what's really special about what I do now is that every time I play, every time I teach this art form, I am saying thank you to all of my teachers. There's a great deal of importance based upon respect for the past and honoring all of your help along the way. And I have found that to be very valuable in this life now. So I teach at several different places. And I have a professional performing group that's here with me today. But my joy is both. I am in love with performing. It sets my heart on fire, and I can't keep a smile off my face, which is a good thing because I'm old and gray now. So I have to have something that I love, as we all do, to keep us going. And for me, it's Japanese drumming. So we hope that when we share with you, we try to play softly for you because this place is so booming, but it's just not possible. So we hope you will embrace our noise as coming from some wonderful space in the world and know that we are saying thank you to all the people in the past, maybe 1,000 years. Thank you.
in the annual reading of the Torah cycle in the Jewish tradition. This week, yesterday, was Parashat Mishpatim. It starts with Jethro being a member of the family now of Moses, related by marriage. The word mishpat has to do with family. But it ends with this passage, a very short, evocative conclusion during which the Holy One has been writing down the commandments that will be brought down to the children of Israel. When Moses had ascended the mountain, the cloud covered the mountain. The presence of God abode on Mount Sinai, and the cloud hid it for 6 days. On the seventh day, God called to Moses from the midst of the cloud. Now the presence of God appeared in the sight of the Israelites as a consuming fire on the top of the mountain. Moses went inside the cloud and ascended the mountain, and Moses remained on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. John Adams, our second president, who was also an unabashed religious liberal for his age, said, "Admire and adore the author of the telescopic universe. Love and esteem the work. Do all in your power to lessen ill and increase good, but never assume to comprehend." Ursula Le Guin, who is a contemporary writer of science fiction, observed that we creep infinitesimally northward through the dirty chaos of a world in the process of making itself. And finally, because it is Black History Month and because Black Lives Matter, these words from Arthur Ashe, the first and only Black American man to win Wimbledon, the U.S. Open, and the Australian Open, and who, as a result of a transfusion, acquired HIV and died at the age of 49. He wrote, "The heroism is remarkably sober and very undramatic. It is not the urge to surpass all others at whatever cost, but the urge to serve others at whatever cost." Did you hear the difference? Not to surpass others at whatever cost, but to serve others at whatever cost. I did something foolish this morning. I told a number of people electronically that I have a really good sermon today. Which is not to say it's not, but I cannot prove it until it happens. But I can say that after trying several times and it not working, at some point, some daimon, some spirit, dibuk, something came along and said, "Do this." And when it was done, with the exception of the typos and a couple of grammatical errors, I could see nothing that needed to be changed. It is a single story. My overnight train from Agra to Varanasi was in a Class A sleeper, but if Class A suggests Amtrak, you would be wrong. It was a 4-person compartment, each berth with a pillow, 2 sheets, a blanket, and in my case, 2 Indian men and an Argentine woman. Between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m., we all lay on our bunks, and I somehow managed to eke out 3 hours of sleep, which was more than I expected. With first light, a man came down the corridor, speaking loudly, "Chai, chai!" And for 4 rupees, I got a 3-ounce terracotta bowl of milky chai tea. I was met at the station and driven to my hotel, which thankfully was ready even at noon to receive me. Curiously energetic, though, I consulted my map and decided to walk downtown, about 4 miles, but I do 6 to 10 miles a day. This was not a problem for me. So I emailed my travel agent, who had scheduled me to be picked up that evening to go down to the Ghats, but told him I'm going on my own and will meet him there. 100 yards down the road, he showed up on a motor scooter, preventing me from walking, and insisted that I allow his employees to drive me, and I relented. They dropped me off a few blocks from the river. They couldn't go any further. The streets were too narrow. And there I was, alone in Varanasi, sometimes called Benares, to the extent that anyone can be alone in an ancient city filled with millions of people. Somehow I found my way to the river, the Ganges, which, unlike any other city, sits above the river by 40 or 50 feet. You can only reach it by descending steps called ghats, more than 80 of which line the river and connect with each other over a span of 3 miles. It was my plan to walk from one end of one ghat to the last of the other along the river, and I did so twice. That evening, having met my guide, he stood at the top of Dashashwamedh Ghat, the one in the center, and tells me, as guides do with that guidely voice they have, the Ganges is the soul of India. Varanasi is the soul of the Ganges. Dashashwamedh Ghat is the soul of Varanasi. This is the holiest place in India. Looking out onto the river, seeing people praying as they stood in the water up to their knees and waist, watching marigold petals floating along, standing near a sadhu, a holy man who was sitting naked, covered with ashes, his hair long and matted on his head, I believed him completely. I have been to Rome and Athens, and I have sat for hours in the ruins of the Forum and the Acropolis. I have beheld and been awed by the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, and stood in the Canyon de Chelly in the Four Corners, which is holy to the Navajo. I have climbed the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan in Mexico, and glimpsed the sacred shrines of Ise in Japan. I've even climbed the Taoist mountain of Taishan in China, and none were as powerful as this. It was not the beauty, for what beauty there was competed with the children playing cricket and flying kites, with the clothing tossed and heaped on the steps of the ghats while people bathed in the river, with the roaming goats and dogs, with the trash from the street food, the couples strolling along in love, with people snoozing on the steps themselves. Nor was it the majesty, for I have seen wider rivers and grander cities. So it was not in the sights or sounds that I felt this power, but that somewhere, somehow, in a way I could not comprehend, time and place met here in a way that was both intimate and ultimate. Now let me tell you why I felt that way. When I first walked there that afternoon along the ghats, moving north from Asi Ghat, which is marked by a series of Shiva lingas around a tree, I eventually passed Dashashwamedh Ghat and arrived at a place with tall piles of wood and plumes of smoke, and I knew that I was approaching Manikarnika Ghat, the cremation grounds. A man with a few teeth, a blue knit cap, another blue sweater, and a white dhoti invited me closer. I had just hired a guide. He leads me out into the midst of the pyres, some burning, some being built, some having been extinguished. He points down to one just below and explains how the men of the family are circling the pyre 5 times before setting it on fire. Another nearby is just building a pyre. The body they are going to burn is perched on the steps, shrouded in saffron. They will bring it to the pyre and add more wood until the body is enclosed in a heap of wood. The first family now, with a priest to guide them, has a bunch of straw in its hand, It's on fire. It has been lit from a fire in a temple above and behind me, a small fire which my guide tells me has not gone out for 2,500 years. All around the temple are huge stacks of wood, as tall as the temple, some taller yet. It takes 200 pounds of wood to build a pyre. The men of the family, after carrying the body here, dipping it in the river, and putting rice in its mouth, build the pyre themselves. And then after building the pyre and saying the prayers and circling it 5 times, they place their smoky brands lit by the eternal fire underneath the wood, and it roars to life. Heat is all around me, pressing upon my face. A dozen pyres are within yards. They burn every day, night and day. Like the small fire, the cremations never, ever stop. They are down by the river, but on platforms around the temple, because in summer the river rises and covers the steps. Behind me, less than 10 feet away, a pyre is well underway. I see feet through the flames. Along the edges of the ghat, other men are watching, looking down, family, friends, bystanders like me. Not a woman. Curiously, there is no odor. The fires are designed to burn very hot, and the bodies are not roasted, but consumed. Smoke rises and then floats out onto the river. It is now 2 rivers, one of water and one of smoke, one hovering above the other. I breathe the scent of burning wood and doubtless the tiny ashes of the dead. India was not what I expected. Something everyone who has been there will tell you. It's not what you expect. I expected at this moment to be horrified, but instead feel reverence. I feared to see something primitive and gruesome, but instead I'm witnessing something noble, even pure. Even as cows and dogs roam between the fires and boats with tourists float offshore, there is something more sacred here than the marble of St. Peter's, something more ancient than the ruins of Delphi, something in this field of death that is more alive than anything I have seen elsewhere. There are in life a few moments so beautiful that even words are a sort of profanity, writes Diana Palmer. I would say powerful more than beautiful. What gifts I have for speech are inadequate to this moment. That's why a few hours later, when my guide tells me this is the holiest place in India, I know he is right. He tells me that the buildings along the shore near the Manikarnika Ghat are filled with people who have come here to die, to spend their last days looking out over the river, watching the very pyres they themselves will be incinerated upon, because they yearn for the release they promise. For those who die and are burned here, whose ashes are poured into Mother Ganga, never need to be reborn. Over 40 years ago, Ernest Becker wrote a book called The Denial of Death, in which he argues that civilization is an immortality project that seeks to outlive death. The hero's quest we hear about in Joseph Campbell and elsewhere is ultimately about some hope that we will never die or overcome it somehow. They're all lies. Here, beside Mother Ganga, amid the fires, I saw something that defied this. Here, life and death swirled together like the smoke and the water, each real, each good, one enfolding the other in an endless embrace that blurs the boundaries of time and place, of you and me, of all things. It becomes a plasma of being. That's what a fire is, you know. A plasma, a cloud of unbound particles. Science calls it a 4th state of matter. They just discovered it a few years ago. but our ancient souls knew that fire was as real as liquid and solid and air. Ancient Indians worshiped the god Agni, the god of fire, who was not the creator, but the very fire itself. It is God's presence along with the river. We come from water and yearn for fire. At Varanasi, these two fluids meet, water and fire, smoke and air, past and present, here and there, life and death. What seems defined becomes separate and blurred. Somehow the roaming animals do not profane this place. The brown and dirty water carrying the ashes of 2,000 years is somehow beautiful. Even the horizon is blurred, the air softened by smoke and fog and pollution, so that the city does not so much end as vanish, and the river merges with the sky that has no up or down. That evening in a boat, as the sun sets behind the Ghats, little votive lights made of marigolds and butter candles appear floating on the river. They are offerings to Mother Ganga for carrying souls to release. Pyres still light the sky, their flames licking the air, and sparks, fragments of the dead lit for a split second, spangle the night and make it beautiful. I drop my hand into the water, feel it across my fingers, its fluid eternity in my own hands. And at that moment, I pray I may return someday. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my Redeemer. Amen and amen.